Hello, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues on the board of the SEC Historical Society, I'd like to welcome you here today for this special program, A Decade of SEC Enforcement Specialization. My name is Annette Nazareth, and I'm Senior Counsel at Davis Polk & Wardwell, and I'm the current president of the SEC Historical Society. I previously served as an SEC Commissioner, and prior to that, I was Director of the Division of Trading and Markets from 1999 to 2005. The SEC Historical Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're not legally affiliated with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, but we certainly share an appreciation of the agency's mission. The Society's mission is to preserve and share the history of the U.S. securities markets. And we do this by continually expanding the collection of unique materials that we have in our virtual museum at sechistorical.org. The museum is freely accessible to anyone with internet access, and I urge you to take a look at it if you haven't already done so. It really is a truly tremendous resource. And now I'd like to introduce to you our program moderator, Jeff Bajukas, who will in turn introduce our panelists. Jeff is currently a partner at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius, and he is the leader of the firm's securities enforcement practice. Prior to rejoining Morgan Lewis last year, Jeff spent nearly 11 years in roles of increasing responsibility in the SEC's Philadelphia regional office, the last 3 as regional director. I'd like to thank Jeff for his role in moderating this program and for his service on our Board of Trustees as Vice President of the Virtual Museum. I also want to express the board's gratitude for the participation of our distinguished panelists today, each of whom currently leads or co-leads a specialized unit in the SEC's Enforcement Division. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you, and I look very forward to the discussion.
Annette, thanks so much. And you are correct. We have a super panel today. As Annette said, we have every single acting chief of a specialized unit at the SEC in the Division of Enforcement to talk today. In fact, the panel is so large that we've decided to split it up into 2 separate parts, 45 minutes each. And so I'm not gonna take any more time than necessary to get us started because I know all of you want to hear from all of them. Before we start, I would be remiss if I didn't echo Annette's statement about the mission of the SEC Historical Society, and I know that Ron Long, my colleague and the Vice President of Development and Engagement, would want me to say, please go to the website and support us. It's all supported by donations. And so we need you. And if you enjoy programs like this and the truly excellent programming on the site itself, please go ahead and support that. Before I start today, I'm going to state the traditional disclaimer for all the participants. On behalf of all the participants today, I would note that any statements made during this program are those of the individuals themselves and do not necessarily reflect those of the commission or its staff. And with that, we'll get started with our first panel. Christie Lipman, Charles Kane, Osman Oz, and Dabney OReilly. And so I'm going to do brief for those of you who do not know these individuals. I find that difficult to believe, but I'm going to go over a little bit of background for each. So Charles is the chief of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA unit in the Division of Enforcement. He was named deputy chief in 2011, acting chief in 2017, and permanent chief in November of 2017. In 2013, he received the Irving R. Pollock Award, recognizing his scholarship and professional expertise in co-authoring the Resource Guide to the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, setting forth a detailed analysis of the FCPA and providing insight into SEC and U.S. Department of Justice enforcement practices. By my count, the SEC has brought around 29 FCPA cases in the last 3 years alone. Charles joined the SEC in 1999 following private practice in Washington He began supervising investigations in 2004 and was promoted to assistant director in 2007. When the Enforcement Division created the National Specialized Units in 2010, he joined the FCPA unit as an assistant director. Next up is Christie Lipman. She's chief of the Division of Enforcement's Cyber Unit. The unit itself was created in 2017, and Christie is its second chief, and she was named chief in December of 2019. On her leadership, the unit has been very busy. By my rough count, in 2021 alone, the SEC brought 17 digital asset ICO cases, as well as cases involving cyber-driven insider trading, market manipulation, cybersecurity controls, and public disclosures, among others. Christie joined the SEC's Division of Enforcement in 2010 as a staff attorney in the Philadelphia office. She held senior attorney positions in the Market Abuse Unit and the Trial Unit before, in August of 2017, becoming a senior advisor to SEC Chairman Jay Clayton. In her role as senior advisor to Chairman Clayton, Christie was the lead advisor to the chairman on matters involving the Division of Enforcement and commission adjudications, among a number of other things. Osman Oz, acting chief of the Division of Enforcement's Complex Financial Instruments Unit, leads a specialized unit of attorneys and industry experts who are located in offices across the country that investigate potential misconduct related to complex financial products and practices involving sophisticated market participants. He has investigated and supervised CFI cases involving subprime automobile loans, CDO auctions, valuation, bankruptcy and distressed asset investments, prime brokerage swaps, business issues, and asset-backed securitizations, among many other issues. Oz joined the SEC in 2010, joined the CFI unit in 2014, and was promoted to assistant regional director in 2018, where he now resides, heading the New York CFI team. Last but not least, Dabney OReilly is the co-chief of the Division of Enforcement's Asset Management Unit. She was named co-chief in June of 2016. Dabney's investigated or supervised a number of significant enforcement cases addressing a wide variety of misconduct across the asset management industry, including the SEC's first action charging a private equity fund manager for misallocating expenses between the manager and private funds. Under her leadership, the unit conducted the Share Class Selection Disclosure Initiative that ordered close to 100 advisors to pay almost $140 million in civil penalties that was returned to investors, civil penalties and disgorgement. She began working in the Los Angeles office in 2005 as a staff attorney in the Division of Enforcement and joined the Asset Management Unit when it was formed in 2010. Dabney also served as counsel to the Director of the Division of Enforcement and became an assistant director in the unit in 2012, an associate over enforcement in the Los Angeles office thereafter. So what we have is we have a number of people who've been at the commission for a number of years, and many of whom were at the commission when these units were created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address questions to each individual, and before answering the first question, if each of you might give just a little overview of your unit, how big it is, the offices that it's located in, that would be helpful. So Charles, I'm going to start with you. You're the elder statesman here. The January 2010 press release announcing the creation of the first 5 units was described as part of, and I'm going to quote here, the most significant reorganization since the Division of Enforcement's establishment in 1972. What was your reaction when you first learned about Rob Khuzami's decision to create these units?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for having me. Appreciate the generous introduction. Before I answer that, substantively, we have about 35 people in the unit. We're located in 6 offices around the country: Boston, Washington, Miami, Fort Worth, Salt Lake, and Los Angeles currently. I think my reaction at the time, I was intrigued, but it was also a time of great upheaval for the division. We were coming off of the after effects of Madoff, and this was a complete restructuring, and not just creating specialized units, but kind of the way it was going to be supervised across the country was new. It was no longer going to be, kind of each region operating independently.
So Dabney, you were also an original member of a unit, in your case, the Asset Management Unit. What drew you to the unit, and what did you think when you first heard about the opportunity?
Thank you, Jeff. And to give you a highlight of the unit overall, we are in almost every regional office throughout the country. We have a group of over 50 attorneys, industry experts, and managers throughout the country. So my view on why I joined the unit, I did give it careful consideration at the time because it was new. We didn't really know what was going to happen with the units and exactly what they were going to be doing. But for me, it really was due to the casework I had done in the investment advisory space before the units were formed. And that work had led me to conclude that those types of cases were really what drove me in conducting investigations because of the consequences that could happen. I had a case in particular where an advisor who just engaged in really risky investing and misled his clients just wiped them completely out. And after you sit across the table from people who are in tears because their retirement savings is completely gone, it really does help drive you to make sure that the industry is operating in the manner in which it's supposed to.
Christie, so Charles touched on this a second ago. One concern at the time of the creation of the units was the ability to supervise personnel in other offices. And as Charles just noted, that was something that was new. As a member of the market abuse unit and now the chief of the cyber unit, how do the units overcome geographic separation of their staff?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Quick overview of the cyber unit. We have about 30 members. Some are here in the home office in DC, and we also have folks in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And then we actually have a liaison in every other region where we don't have a presence, just to help coordinate kind of core digital asset type cases. As to the question relating to the geographic separation, I think in market abuse and certainly now in cyber, we did a few things to kind of stay connected pre-COVID. We try to have a unit conference every year or every other year, budget permitting. We also have periodic inventory calls, and sometimes those are intended to cover new tools or new investigative techniques. Sometimes we just take turns talking about our investigations, and it kind of helps to make up for that sort of hallway talk that you miss by being in different offices. Prior to moving into telework, I was also traveling a fair amount. I had kind of recently taken on my role and was still getting my arms around our docket. And so I do think most unit chiefs, in the before times, travel quite a bit to make sure that they're making those connections across the regions.
And you mentioned pre-COVID. It was interesting to me as the commission went to full-time telework with COVID. Do you think the units were actually in a better position to deal with that at least from a supervisory and organizational standpoint than maybe the staff in the regional offices were?
I think we probably weren't in a better position to telework because I think we all were caught a little off guard by the concept of telework, and it was brought on rather suddenly. But we were probably more accustomed to having those like milestone meetings by conference call or making other arrangements because we are spread out across the regions. And so, those meetings where you're making charging decisions and things like that, we necessarily already had to do a lot of those by phone. Our inventory calls have continued uninterrupted, so that's been a nice point of consistency. But I'd also say I do think overall that the SEC was pretty nimble when we moved to telework. There were, of course, bumps in the road at the beginning, but our systems seemed to handle the uptick in remote access, and our people were incredibly resilient and really committed to staying productive in the face of uncertainty.
And just a definitional question: when you say inventory, what do you mean by that? Just so we're all clear.
The docket, what everyone was working on across, what everyone's working on across the unit, because how it is when you're in the office. You just walk down the hall and you might talk to the person in the office next door to you about something you're dealing with, or ask them if they've encountered something like that. And you get to hear about one another's cases that way, or even just, grabbing coffee, and you miss out on that aspect of the in-person kind of relationship. But we have these inventory calls to help us all kind of understand what everyone's working on, and have a sense of who you might go to talk through an issue because maybe they've encountered it before.
So Oz, shifting gears a little bit, Rob Khuzami, and I keep on mentioning Rob because obviously this change took place under his supervision as head of the Division of Enforcement. And I would note that there is a super interview of Rob in the Historical Society's archives that covers this among a number of other topics. At the time in January 2010, one of the reasons for doing the units was to provide, and I'm going to quote here from the press release, an improved understanding of complex products and markets, earlier and better capability to detect emerging fraud and misconduct, greater capacity to file cases with strike force speed, and an increase in expertise throughout the division. Just in my work with CFI, I feel like when I was at the commission, I feel like CFI in many ways advances each of these goals, but the unit's mysterious. It's a little bit of a black box. So why don't you explain to us a little bit about what CFI does?
Thanks, Jeff. And it's a great lead up. Before I jump in, I want to thank the Historical Society for having me. It's great to be here with everyone and to represent CFI as a longtime unit member, staff attorney, and assistant director. On size, to give you that background, we're currently around 35 unit members, give or take. That includes attorneys and dedicated industry experts, along with a CFI-specific data analytics specialist. Our unit members, much like the FCPA and the other groups, we reside throughout the SEC's offices, home office, Chicago, Denver, Fort Worth, Atlanta, and New York. As to what does CFI do, Jeff, the historical mandate has been to identify and investigate misconduct arising from the creation, sale, usage, rating, and valuation of complex instruments. The piece that gathers some of the mystery and the attention is what are the complex instruments? Those instruments have included the whole range in my experience. And the unit has built on existing knowledge that was here at the commission before, but we've really proactively developed faculty with a wide range in many complex products, in my opinion, various types of derivatives, swaps, certain types of fixed income and credit products, securitized, structured products, CLOs, CDOs, complex ETPs, and the list grows, and there are more. And although oftentimes our matters and the work that CFI does involves larger, sophisticated entities on the sell and the buy side, for instance, the unit's work does cut across the whole spectrum with various market participants. You hit on a few things. The initial announcement for this unit, first known as the Structured and New Products Unit, and now known as CFI, it does still aspire to check all of those items that you listed with efficiency and stealth-like speed and some of the other things you mentioned. Our casework, it often is done in collaboration with colleagues outside of our unit, and it involves a fair amount of first-of-kind actions and issues of first impression.
And so at the risk of asking a follow-up that you may or may not answer, you can veto. Do you feel like CFI is proactive or reactive when it comes to looking at these different types of products?
Yeah, no, I welcome that question. I think one of the things culturally since I've joined the unit that we've really endeavored to do is to be proactive, and I think that's consistent with what you cited whenever the unit was first created. There is a great emphasis put on the proactive work that can take place within enforcement and within this group.
Thanks for that. So Dabney, back to you. I know that when the Philadelphia office added AMU personnel, the happiest people in the office were the examination staff, and that's not due to who you chose. Explain how the unit interacts with the Division of Examinations and how you think that's benefited the SEC.
Sure. It's nice to hear they were happy to hear that we were created, and because we were happy to work with them as well. In fact, one of our industry experts actually went over and headed the private funds unit over in exams after he had served for several years with the unit. But we do have a very close relationship with the Division of Examinations as well as the Division of Investment Management. And what that means is that we reach out to them regularly, and each of those divisions know that we are the key contact within enforcement regarding any issues they are seeing in the asset management space. So the result has been greater collaboration and discussion of what staff across the commission are seeing in the industry and new risks, and getting that information out there within the various divisions that touch on those issues, whether it be exams or on the regulatory side and IM. And so we've been able to respond much faster to new issues and risks as they have arisen. In light of your question to Oz, is that we have tried to be more proactive as a result when we see an area that may generate risk. So for example, if we have historically, when we identify a potential broader risk area through one of our investigations, then brought that issue to the other divisions, including exams and IM, to discuss those risks as a group, try and brainstorm about ways to address them.
And so a follow-up on that, I mean, I think that those of us that have a practice that involves the examination staff and clients who are subject to exams, obviously closely watch the yearly examination priorities as well as risk alerts that come out. What, if any, role does your unit have in the creation of those types of issuances from examinations?
So exams obviously takes the lead and is the primary drafter of those documents, especially their priorities and their observations from their exams. But we do get an opportunity to review them and provide comment or insights that we can from our own experiences. And we do take the lead for doing that for the Division of Enforcement. So, for example, we do look at the exam priorities every year. We get an advanced draft of those and can provide comments in response to what we read there and what we have observed. In addition to the risk alerts, exam issues some great risk alerts, and we've been lucky to be a part of some of them. So, for example, they recently gave a risk alert regarding ESG related issues as well as private fund issues, and we were involved in reviewing those and providing some comments to those.
So, Charles, in the FCPA space, the commission is oftentimes investigating matters that are also being investigated by the Department of Justice. Do you think that the creation of the FCPA unit has benefited both sides in connection with parallel investigations? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it's greatly benefited us, and I hope it's benefited the department as well. They were ahead of us as far as having a specialized FCPA unit, and what was under then the U.S. Attorney's Manual and now the Justice Manual. While an FCPA matter could be handled in any U.S. Attorney's office, they had to coordinate with the fraud section here in Washington. And so us having a similar unit where we're able to coordinate and collaborate regularly with the same set of people has greatly enhanced our ability to work collaboratively and in parallel. And over the years, we've done trainings together. We learn from our cases together. We also both support the U.S. In its participation in the working group on bribery at the OECD and are part of the U.S. delegation on anti-corruption issues. So there's some real synergies there. And, prior to there being a unit, there were a small group of us who had some regular touch points with the FCPA. And while it seemed like a lot at the time, it's nothing like what comes from having a unit that's specialized in the subject matter. And you always know who to talk to on our side, and we always have those relationships on the other side as well.
I'm going to, again, at the risk of being vetoed, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So do you, are FCPA cases now largely handled by your group, or can there be situations where non-unit staff will handle an FCPA case?
Yeah, there are FCPA cases outside of the unit. There always have been. We're here as a resource. Sometimes we co-staff them, and we always collaborate along the way. So I think it's a great way, especially when we co-staff. I think it's a great way for people who don't have as much experience in the subject matter to work side by side with people who do have it in order to, um, help them get educated on the subject matter. And also, I think part of the real benefit to a specialized unit is to be able to disseminate that knowledge throughout the division as a whole.
So, Christie, coming back to you, in preparing for this, I took a look at the width and breadth of what your unit covers from the original press release announcing it, and market manipulation, hacking, violations involving distributed ledger technology, misconduct perpetrated using the dark web, intrusions into retail brokerage accounts, cyber-related threats to trading platforms. I mean, the list goes on, and certainly your unit has done a much broader group of cases than just those listed in the press release. So my question to you, assuming all those facts to be true, my question to you is, how do you decide where to allocate your unit's resources, given the amount that the cyber unit's covering?
Very strategically. There are some kind of natural divides, though. We have a fair number of market abuse unit alumni in the unit, so a lot of our trading cases end up with folks who already have a depth of knowledge and experience in insider trading or manipulative trading and account intrusions. I've also observed a sort of natural divide across the regions with respect to our cybersecurity cases, as it relates to both public issuers and SEC registrants. And our personnel in Chicago and LA seem to have an interest and a proficiency for those cases, so they often end up in those groups. And then, of course, across the unit, all of our personnel have the relevant expertise to work on our digital asset cases. So those are the cases relating to token issuances, exchanges, BD activity, that type of work. I suppose I have to give Rob Cohen credit, because the unit, as he kind of assembled it a few years ago, really has a wealth of expertise that allows us to fulfill what I agree with you is a pretty broad mandate.
And so I'm gonna follow up again with right to veto on something that Charles just said, which is work that his unit does in working with people outside the unit and passing on expertise. Is that something that the cyber unit does, and are there, maybe you can explain how that works?
Sure. I'm sure there are more ICOs than we have bodies in the cyber unit. So there have historically been a lot of ICO cases outside of the unit. It's an area that I think a lot of investigative attorneys are just interested in working in, and there's no shortage of those cases. So we do see a lot of those outside of the unit, and we'll usually have kind of like an advisory role. We have a core group of people who will sometimes conduct training with other folks in the division just on like how to conduct an ICO investigation. But they're also a good resource for templates and just understanding the landscape. And then, of course, I like to stay involved in the charging decisions, because we want to make sure that the charging decisions and any settlement terms are consistent with our programmatic, objectives, and that we're treating market participants fairly and uniformly.
So Oz, I'm gonna come back to you, because there was something that you mentioned in talking about the work that CFI does, and that's how the unit leverages commission resources in other groups and other divisions. Do you feel that having this unit structure has been an effective way in tapping into other expertise and resources within the commission? And if it is, maybe explain how that happens with CFI.
Sure. And And I like this question because it provides an opportunity to tout CFI in a way, but also the commission's resources writ large. The building, as I've learned through my time here, has a tremendous amount of knowledge. It's really quite impressive, although harnessing all of the knowledge at times does take effort. So how does CFI do that to leverage resources? I'll highlight one simple way in that many a time we leverage commission resources really through fostered relationships with other groups in and beyond enforcement. We actually have several unit members who spent time or started with the agency in a sister division, and that really streamlines and helps to pave the way for resource and knowledge exchange. In addition, I would note that the general level of collaboration with CFI colleagues beyond the unit, with other panelists here in their groups, and then with other sister divisions, it's pretty high. And so that takes place even when there's no set agenda item. And it's really for CFI's purposes to be as market smart as possible. And I've heard both Charles and Dabney and Christie comment on this. It really is it's a two-way street for CFI. So we're always eager to share our group's knowledge with others, and then that's frequently reciprocated and puts the unit in a good position to leverage or use and best facilitate resource sharing.
So I mean, I saw that in particular in Philadelphia with some quant resources that were kind of spread throughout the commission. With that kind of the data analytics aspect of what you do, is that something that is a kind of a shared lift among multiple divisions when you're harnessing those resources?
Certainly, and I think, Jeff, you mentioning Philadelphia and your time there, as you know, our data specialist is housed in Philadelphia, and he's a wealth of resource for our unit and for other groups. He works with other units that are represented here today, and I think it really just shows that collaboration, even on the data analytics side, and all of the knowledge exchange that occurs.
So, keeping an eye on the time, I thought maybe we would shift to what I'm going to call a speed round. And so, Charles, I have a mute button. No, just kidding. So just I'm going to ask a question, and maybe you all can give me just a moment or two in reaction. It's not going to be a one-word question or anything like that. So can each of you discuss a challenge? We've talked about the positives, but a challenge particular to your unit that you faced and overcame, either as a chief of the unit or as a member of the unit. And Christie, I'd start with you.
Sure. And at the risk of taking the answer, everyone's going to want to take, there aren't enough of us. So obviously there's a lot going on in our space, and we have to be really intentional about what we investigate. So I won't claim to have completely overcome this challenge, but we really do work to kind of constantly evaluate the landscape and focus our enforcement actions on those investigations that are going to have the most impact on the market and the industry, and the most impact for investors.
Oz?
Yeah, Christie sort of hit one of the main challenges I think that confronts CFI too. It's just strategic allocation of resources, as they are very precious. To give you one other challenge that faces the unit, and although it's not particular to the unit, it may be a little more acute. It's just the challenge of the new, Jeff, that we face oftentimes in the unit, dealing with the complex product, and layered on top of that, some complex provision or legal interpretation that may be necessary, relevant to the cases that we're working on. I'd loop back to a statement earlier that I made relating to just resource sharing and getting to know our colleagues very well throughout other divisions is the way in which I think CFI tries to effectively overcome that particular challenge when it comes to partnering with other divisions on cases where the new challenge is presented.
Thanks. So Dabney, other than resources, What challenges have you confronted in the unit, and how have you overcome them?
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to Christie's first question and her first answer about the staff in the unit being spread all across the country. That is a unique challenge when you first come into this role of managing people at a distance. It's obviously one that everyone who is a chief of a unit faces, but there are a lot of resources. You just had to stay on top of it. We have video phones at the SEC in our offices, and the AMU was a big proponent of using those so we could at least see each other. Now with the telework tools, that's much easier. But that was always the biggest challenge.
And Charles, you're our anchor man here, so not being able to select from the prior answers.
So no resources and no remote management.
Right.
I'm not sure what much I have. I'll go with something mundane that maybe draws on all of it. In this particular space, one of the biggest challenges is language skills. Our cases could involve any particular part of the world, and so early on, we developed just kind of a list of all the people in the commission who might have particular language skills that we might be able to go to, to help us with maybe some key document translations or something like that in order to help us move a little faster. At this point now, we've transitioned to having some contract attorneys with language skills in languages that we see often that we're able to use. But early days, we kind of had to cobble together um, a list of people who are willing to help as best they can given their day jobs as well.
That's really interesting. So do you think that because there was an FCPA unit that had that kind of mass in the area, that it was easier to marshal those kinds of internal assets and then ultimately get contractors that could do it?
Yeah, well, I think on the first part, people are always willing to help their colleagues across across the commission. So I think even without specialization, you'd find people who would be willing to help out as best they can. But I don't think we would have been able to get the dedicated resources for contract attorneys with language capabilities in the absence of a specialized unit.
That's really interesting. So. Okay, so we're through our speed round. Dabney, I'm going to come back to you. We got a couple minutes left. So let's talk about the share class disclosure initiative, which your unit was responsible for overseeing. Do you think that having the unit made this more possible, or did it bring the issues that were the subject of the initiative into sharper focus that allowed the staff to focus on this issue?
Yes, absolutely. Having the AMU is what made the initiative possible, because as a result of our national presence and focus on investment advisors, I was able to recognize the need to find an alternative way to efficiently and effectively addressing the type of misconduct covered by the initiative. And it was by being familiar with the issues that we were able to structure the initiative such that it focused on what it needed to focus on and to incentivize firms to participate, and resulted in clients being made whole for the harm that they incurred. So normally a single investigation would have required the AMU and one attorney to spend almost 2 years investigating the case. But as a result of the initiative, the commission brought almost 100 actions in just over a year and ordered the return of over 139 million. So yes, I think by having the unit, we were able to identify a pretty significant problem that had been going on, and to get it addressed as quickly as we could. I think it also helped to encourage firms to participate, as they knew that there was a unit within enforcement that was devoted to asset management and those issues, and they were likely then to get caught at some point in the future. So why not take advantage of some of the benefits of the self-reporting initiative? And I think you're probably going to talk to Leanne about this later on. But one aspect of this, it was also an opportunity to work with others. We worked with Leanne and the PFAU quite a bit to get their guidance from their work on their initiative that they did, which was indispensable for structuring our initiative.
So in the time we have left, I'm going to go to another speed round 2. And this is just going to ask you, what do you find is the most rewarding aspect of working in your respective units? And so, Christie, I'll start with you again.
I think it's just kind of the constant evolution. We have, really rapidly evolving technology in the space that we're responsible for bringing enforcement actions in. And so our unit has to continually adapt to those new assets, new technological developments. It keeps the cases interesting, and our people are really committed to that evolution and to being kind of thought leaders on how to approach these innovations.
So Charles, I'm going to go to you next. Most rewarding aspect of working as chief of the unit.
Well, I'm a secret softie, and it's got to be the relationships. We have just a tremendous group of folks within the unit, dedicated and passionate about what we do. But the nature of the work also allows us to develop really great working relationships with people who are working in the same space, literally all around the world. So, we have relationships with law enforcement in more countries than I can count. And absent the experience in the unit, would never have had the opportunity to develop those relationships. So that's what I think is, for me, the best thing about the unit.
Oz?
Yeah, I'm going to echo both Christie and Charles here, and also reference back to something I mentioned earlier. But I personally find the challenge of the new really rewarding. I like grappling with those issues. And as well, I really do enjoy the team that has been built within CFI. It's truly a dedicated and an energetic group to work with.
And Dabney, without taking any of the prior answers, no, I'm just kidding. So Dabney, what do you find the most rewarding about being a chief of unit?
I think it's seeing the staff, because of their specialization, being empowered when dealing with imposing counsel. They know what they're talking about, and they know how the industry works, and they know what the issues are. And I think that empowers them significantly when they're engaging with opposing counsel on their investigations.
Well, that's a great way to end. And being from an office that had 2 unit heads in it at the time this was created, and a number of unit members kind of saw firsthand the benefits of specialization. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you to all of you for taking the time today to give us your perspectives on the units and insight to how you do what you do. It's invaluable, and it's going to go into the history of the SEC at the Historical Society site. And encourage you to stick around in the green room and listen to our last 3 panelists as they have the unenviable task of trying to better all of you with all of your great answers to questions. So thank you very much for the time. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jeff.
So with that, why don't we switch to our second panel of the day? So I'd like to introduce Adam Adderton, Leanne Gaunt, and Joe Sansone as our second panel. And I'll do a little bit of background. Obviously, the same disclaimer applies. Adam is the co-chief of the Division of Enforcement's Asset Management Unit. He was named co-chief in May of 2019. Adam joined the SEC in 2008 as a staff attorney in the Division of Enforcement. He joined the Asset Management Unit at its inception in 2010 and was promoted to assistant director in 2013. Adam has extensive experience investigating and supervising actions that involve a wide range of conduct across the asset management industry, including actions concerning conflicts of interest, failing to disclose investment strategy, unauthorized use of client funds, Form CRS filing and delivery failures, and misrepresentations to investors regarding performance, among a number of issues. Leanne Gaunt is chief of the Enforcement Division's Public Finance Unit. formerly known as the Muni Unit. She was named chief in November of 2013. Leanne's worked in the specialized unit since its inception in 2010 and supervised the agency's first pay-to-play enforcement action for in-kind political campaign contributions in September of 2012, when the SEC charged a financial services firm and executive vice president for violations related to contributions to the then state treasurer of Massachusetts. Under her leadership, the unit conducted the Municipal Continuing Disclosure Cooperation Initiative, which I'm going to refer to as MCDC, and a voluntary self-reporting program targeting material misstatements and omissions in municipal bond offering documents. Leanne came to the SEC from private practice in 2000, and before joining the unit was a staff attorney and supervisor. And last but not least, Joe Sansone. Joe is chief of the Division of Enforcement's Market Abuse Unit. He was named co-chief in September of 2015 and chief in September of 2017. In his time at the commission, Joe has investigated, supervised a dizzying array of cases involving the focus of the unit, complex insider trading rings, and other abusive trading schemes and misconduct. In the last year alone, the unit brought cases involving insider trading rings, front-running, unregistered broker-dealers, wash sales involving meme stocks, payment for order flow, order routing, and the list just goes on. Joe began working for the SEC in 2007 and also was an inaugural member of the Market Abuse Unit. So as you can see from those introductions, each of our members are original members of their respective units. Joe, as an inaugural member of the MAU, other than the opportunity to work with our friend Dan Hawk, what drew you to joining the Market Abuse Unit? And before I would ask, actually, before you answer that, if you could give a little bit of background on the unit itself, size and geographic scope, I'd appreciate that. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. The Market Abuse Unit currently occupies 7 different offices, and we have approximately 40 staff throughout the unit, which includes attorneys, as well as industry experts that we call specialists. Trying to think back on the creation of the unit and how we kicked this off. It's funny you mentioned Dan Hawk, who was the first chief of Market Abuse Unit, and it's true that there was one person who was really instrumental in getting me to join the Market Abuse Unit, but it wasn't Dan Hawk. And I think it was Charles or one of the other panelists who mentioned earlier today that the creation of the units was part of a restructuring of the Division of Enforcement that also involved other changes. And one of those changes was the elimination of the branch chief position. And luckily for me, the woman who had been my branch chief was promoted to assistant director and took a position in the Market Abuse Unit. So I'd love to have a story like Dabney's, where I worked on an investigation and I knew that that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my career at the SEC. But the truth is that a big part of my decision was the people, knowing in particular that Maureen Lewis, my mentor at the time, was going to be joining the unit, was really all I needed to know. But the unit did have other great things going for it, including a case that had recently been filed, not by the Market Abuse Unit, but by some of its members, which was the Galleon Management case, an insider trading case against Raj Rajaratnam and others. And to me, looking at that case and the scope of it and the impact of it, that was also something that was really drew me to the unit. The idea that we would take on those really tough cases, really complicated cases, but also the idea that we were willing to take on well-resourced defendants and develop those types of cases that would have a big impact.
That's interesting, Joe. I just thought it was a love of insider trading, so I'm glad I got to hear that. Adam, you were an original member of the AMU, and Dabney's already covered the geographical scope of the unit. Did you have any concerns about joining a unit?
First, thanks for having me, Jeff. And the short answer to your question is I didn't. And I think I have a story that sort of closely parallels Joe's story. I was working for a supervisor who was a branch chief at the time, Julie Reevy, and she was going to be joining the asset management unit. I knew I wanted to keep working with Julie, and I knew that wherever she was going to go was going to be interesting cases we're going to follow. So that was my initial attraction. But at the same time, I've been working on some cases involving hedge fund misappropriation, hedge fund valuation, sort of some really interesting issues. And I thought I could really get into this. I was very new to the SEC at the time the unit was formed. And I thought, well, I'll do this for a little while and see where things go. And now, 11 years later, I'm still here. So it's turned out to be a terrific decision for me. But at the time, it was at least a little serendipitous in that I probably didn't know enough to even know if I should be having some concerns.
So, Leanne, in 2010, there was already a municipal securities working group that I think may have been a precursor to the idea of specialization. Although I will say, in coming over to the commission in 2010, law firms had been specializing for years before then. So it was interesting to see the commission and the reaction to the idea of specialization. Can you talk about what was different about having a unit as opposed to a working group, and what led you to choose to join that group, that unit?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for having me. Just a quick summary about the unit at the outset. So we, like the other groups, we have staff in several regional offices. We have in all people in 8 offices. We're about 25 people strong. And that includes staff attorneys, supervisors, and our unit specialists. They're sort of people who previously worked in the industry. And so, to your question about the existence of a working group, which preceded the unit, I actually was not involved in the working group, but I have done a little research in advance of this. And as I understand it, it was a loose informal group of people who had an interest in munis. And so, comparing that kind of a group, I think you can see, as Charles mentioned, it's really no one's day job to focus on municipal bonds if it's just a working group. And so the development, the formation of the unit really gave the division the space and a group of people the space and time and the mandate to really focus in a way that had not been focused on before. And I think that was really all the difference between a working group and a kind of a committed unit in which the division and the commission committed resources in a really serious way. And in terms of how I decided how I came into the unit, it's a little bit more like Joe and Adam's story. When the units were first formed, I was a supervisor in the Boston regional office, and at that time, just a historical note, at that time, David Bergers was the regional director of that office, and he was a big believer in Rob Khuzami's vision of these units, and he wanted to participate as from the Boston office perspective fully. And so there were 5 units, and there were 5 enforcement assistant directors, and I was one. And essentially, we were told everybody's got to be in a unit, and so we didn't have to do a cage match or anything to figure out who was going to be in what unit. It actually sorted itself out pretty easily. But each of us ended up deciding on a particular unit, and I ended up deciding on what ultimately became the public finance abuse unit, in large part because I had a person in my group who was still in the unit, Lou Randazzo, who was expert in the commission and still is on pay-to-play rules, which apply to municipal underwriters. So, just with that background, and Lou and I, we joined up, and that was how I started in the unit.
So, I'm getting a little bit of reverb. So Adam, one of the questions that I think comes up from the outside looking in, and Dabney talked a little bit about this, the interaction between the exam staff and the and your unit. Can you explain kind of how often your unit's meeting with the Division of Examinations at an overarching level? And does the unit track trends in referrals? Does it get involved in referrals at the examination with the examination staff and referrals to enforcement?
Sure. So it's a good question. And the short answer is we work really closely with our colleagues in the Division of Examinations. We engage with them in a few different ways. Dabney talked about how we provide some input into their priorities, obviously still their priorities, but we provide input based on what we're seeing in our investigations to the extent we think that those would be helpful. We also meet both in the home office and in the regional offices with the exam staff on a regular basis with periodic, usually monthly referral meetings. On a more ad hoc basis, Dabney and I and others in the unit will engage with examinations national leadership when we're considering particular sweeps, particular initiatives. And so a good example of that is the recent Form CRS sweep that we may talk about a little bit later. We also engage with them even more informally when we're seeing issues in our investigations that we think might have an industry-wide application. And so there is a flow of communication from enforcement back to examinations about what we're seeing. Similarly, there's a flow of information from examinations about what they're seeing to enforcement as they're identifying new issues and new risk areas. Obviously, there's separate divisions, and examinations doesn't do our work for us, and they don't sort of stalk ahead of us. But we do coordinate with them pretty extensively. And I think one other important point to make is that it's not just at the leadership level. I think our assistant directors in most of our offices have good relationships with the examination leadership, and I think many of our staff members in the unit have good relationships with frontline examiners. So I think that there's a lot of benefits to that, both for both divisions and ultimately for the commission and for investors, in that information flow is moving quickly and is moving sort of the right direction, so that we're making the best decisions that we can, both on what matters, what we should be looking at, and if there's going to be a referral, what the contours of that might look like.
So let me do a follow-up on that. So the nature and character of referrals. I mean, I think one of the things that in my time at the commission, I saw kind of a dramatic change in was the I don't want to say quality referrals, because I don't want to suggest that referrals didn't have quality, but the thoughtfulness that in the interaction between the enforcement staff and the examination staff with regard to referrals. Can you talk about what influence your units had on that, on kind of the exchange of ideas when it comes to referrals?
Yeah, and I hope that if you had someone from examinations on, they would say that we've been helpful. We've certainly endeavored to be helpful. So what we have done is at the outset, we talk with exams about the issues that they're looking at to make sure we understand all of the risks and particular issues as with respect to any particular referral that may be coming over. When we're talking about a specific referral, when we take those referrals, we often do stay in contact with the exam staff. So this is after the examination has ended, and we'll come back to them as we conduct the information or the investigation. They have so much information about the registrant that we don't have, and they have questions maybe that they would have asked if they had more time or had no more facts at that stage. So I think that by asking those questions and by coming back and having that feedback loop with exam staff, I think that makes sort of the next examination and the next referral better. I will also say that we have had exam staff stay on in investigations that came out of referrals through the investigative stage, which is invaluable for us to have the perspective and the insight that they have from doing the examination. And I think then exam staff can take the learning from those investigations back to their next examination, and to the extent there's going to be a referral, maybe sharpen that referral even a little bit more. One last thing that we've done is we've tried very hard to get back to exam staff, A, if we elect not to take a particular referral, or B, if we take a referral, but it doesn't end up leading to an enforcement recommendation from the Division of Enforcement. In those cases, we do like to go back to them and close the loop and say, these are the issues that we ran into. These are the evidentiary issues we found. Oftentimes, they're things exams could never have been aware of during the examination. And so, I hope that our efforts are making it easier for our exam colleagues to assess whether a particular matter is worthy of a referral. But I do think it's a really good symbiotic relationship that we have with them.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to go to speed round. You all have now seen speed rounds, so you know what you're going to be asked. I'm going to start with the question about each of you discussing a challenge particular to the unit that you faced and overcame either as chief or as a member of the unit. And I'm going to add a caveat to this. If you say lack of resources, then if you could explain where you would put those resources if you got them, that might be helpful. So Joe, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't want anybody to get the idea that I don't want more resources, but I'm going to try to focus on something else. And it ties into what Christie and others have talked about, which is thinking back at how daunting it was to get a unit off the ground when staff were located, and at that time in 8 different offices. And we also had a project to hire industry experts into our group from outside of the SEC. Bringing together a group of people in 8 different offices, plus integrating staff who had no SEC, or some of whom had no SEC experience at all. And this really, I think, was the biggest challenge of the units. It was really largely solved over time and just having the opportunity for people to work together, I think, and choosing the right people, people who were collaborative and willing to share, and who were, genuinely excited by the work. And so this has really been, I think, part of the greatest success of the units is overcoming those challenges. And I would say as well, building bridges to others throughout the Division of Enforcement. I saw a huge change from the first years of the unit, where we were largely working on our own investigations, more or less with the resources in one particular office, to, for example, by the time we were 2 or 3 years in, working on the Newswire hacking case, for example, where we had staff in multiple different offices, specialists from different offices, IT forensics, OIA, and even other units, really all working together to bring that case, which was filed in August of 2015. And I think from that point, we've just kind of continued to expand those relationships and really to benefit from not just the expertise developed within the units, but also other places within the division.
Thanks for that, Joe. Adam, tough act to follow. Challenge that you had and overcame as either a member of the unit or a co-chief.
Yeah, so I, like Joe, will never turn down resources, and probably if I had a little more time to think on it, could tell you all kinds of places where I could put more people. But the challenge that I think I want to talk about is the consistently expanding waterfront of what we have to cover. This is similar to, I think, something that Christie talked about, but the number of registered investment advisors goes up every year. For most of the years that I've been in the unit, the assets that are under advisement by, or under management by those investment advisors goes up every year. There's a proliferation of new strategies every year that are being offered by investment advisors. And so the sort of remit of our responsibility grows every year. And so to respond to that challenge in a world of relatively fixed resources, one of the things I think the unit has done really well is to rely on data and to rely on relationships to figure out where to focus the limited resources that we do have. And so you talked with Dabney a little bit about the Share Class Selection Disclosure Initiative, which was full credit to Dabney, her really great idea to get at a problem that we had been seeing over and over and over again. But we've been able to do that, in some other areas where we have particular data sets that we can screen or that we can query to find out where's the best place to deploy our resources. And then in terms of leveraging relationships, we've worked over the years as in the unit to develop good relationships with various constituencies in exams. For example, in the private fund unit within exams, we have a really good relationship with those folks, and they've helped us focus on particular issues that we should be looking at. Similarly, in the Division of Investment Management, we've developed relationships with the Disclosure Review Group, developed relationships with the analytics groups, and so they can help us sort of narrow in on the needles that we should be looking at instead of the entire haystack. And so I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, and I think that's probably one of the best things we've done to try to address it.
So Leanne, to you, biggest challenge and how it was overcome?
Sure. So I'm not sure it's fully overcome, but the biggest challenge for me was, and probably still is to some extent, the relative lack of precedent in our space, legal precedent in our space. So notwithstanding, the unit's been in operation for about 10 years. Prior to that time, the enforcement division brought very, very few cases in the municipal securities and public pension space. And so, as a unit, what we've had to grapple with in almost every case is that almost every case is a novel one. Sometimes it's a somewhat novel theory, sometimes it's an application of a rule or a provision that's never been enforced before. And so that has been, it's always easier when there's precedent, someone who's paved the path ahead of you. And I think that's been one of the obstacles, I think, that as a unit, we have overcome. And what we've done essentially is, we have an extremely strong partnership with the key divisions within the commission, in particular the Office of Municipal Securities, headed by Rebecca Olson. We have a partnership with that group that has allowed us to kind of work our way through some of these really novel issues. We're in touch very commonly with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, which is a standard setter for conduct within the municipal securities market. And so, I think, we have overcome that challenge, but it's a continuing challenge. I mean, almost every case continues to be kind of novel in some way or other. Maybe it's not so much a bug, but a feature. But we've inculcated a culture where everybody acknowledges that that's how it's going to be, and most of our cases aren't easy.
So Jill, I want to pick up on one thing that you mentioned just a moment ago, and that's the ability for the unit to hire specialists. And as you know, that was an aspect of this structure, this change that was certainly felt in Philadelphia, in particular with the addition of the market abuse unit and the hiring of specialists. Do you think that the unit structure made the hiring of the specialists that you have in the unit possible? And also, can you talk about the types of experts the MAU has hired and to what effect?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it was anything in particular about the structure of the unit, but I think more the newness of the unit and the fact that experimentation was encouraged. And in the case of the specialist, the experiment was to bring people in from outside of the SEC. And who were not lawyers, which is the typical SEC hire, to bring these people into the enforcement division and to use their knowledge and skills to assist us in our investigations. And I think that it was really a tremendous success, but not necessarily in the ways that we thought it would be. And I guess one aspect in particular is that it gave us the ability to conduct data analysis that the division really had not had, or had only had in small pockets. Because what these industry experts brought with them was not just subject matter expertise, but a skill set, a data analytics skill set. And it really paired well with some of the existing resources that we have. So you asked about who these specialists are. I would put them broadly into two groups. We hired people with expertise in trading strategies, as well as data analytics and back office, broker-dealer back office practices. And then we had a number of homegrown experts who were expert in SEC systems and SEC data collection, and in some cases, experts in subject matter such as market structure. And really, it was kind of the pairing of those two groups that allowed us to create data analytics tools that we still use, allowed us to scrub the data that is kind of so essential to many of our investigations, to produce accurate data that we could rely on for the purposes of conducting those investigations, as well as creating visualization tools that the staff could use to see data and to understand kind of more clearly what was going on, which we use in our investigations and sometimes even in testimony when we're seeking to develop evidence in our investigations. So that's kind of an overview of our work in that area. And again, it's been one of really the pleasures of working in the unit is to see that develop.
So Leanne, same question to you. I mean, does having a unit give you, I don't want to say a better case because the case is the same, but maybe a more direct case for additional resources, and has the unit hired specialists to assist it in its enforcement activities?
So it's a great question, and particularly within the PFA unit, our unit specialists are absolutely critical to all of our cases. And so our unit specialists probably come in a couple of different groups. We have first and foremost Mark Zahner, who is the deputy chief of the unit. So he sort of serves a dual function, but he is a former bond lawyer. And within the municipal securities market, it's not just federal securities laws. In fact, that's the least of it. Tax law is a big feature, and state law. Each state has different laws associated with issuing municipal bonds, and there's no real federal regulatory scheme associated with this. So having a bond lawyer, within the unit as a kind of specialist, it has been, absolutely critical to the unit success. And then the other unit specialists, we have 3 within the unit, have all actually been with the unit since its inception. They've all come from outside of the SEC and brought that really important market participant perspective. We have a former muni credit analyst, a former muni trader, and a municipal accountant. And municipal accounting is entirely different from regular accounting. And I think our unit specialist may be the only person within the SEC who has this expertise. And so, we have really benefited from them. It is hard for me to imagine, even with the many years of experience that our staff attorneys and supervisors have developed over these years, that it is hard for me to imagine that we could be as effective as we are and as smart and efficient as we are without those folks. And in addition, they actually work on cases outside the unit. They consult with folks over in exams, and you know, they really it multiplies the efficiency.
So Adam, I'm going to shift gears for a moment and ask you about, you had mentioned just a moment ago the Form CRS sweep, and which, for those of you who aren't aware, the Division of Enforcement announced actions against 21 investment advisors and 6 broker-dealers in July of this past year, or in July of 2021, I should say, for failing to timely file and deliver their client or customer relationship summaries. And in looking at the final paragraph of the press release, which maybe only people who worked at the SEC ever really do, you see a number of different constituencies that are credited with work on this matter. Can you just talk for a minute about the leadership role that your unit played in that effort, and also what you see in the future on this kind of Reg BI sweep and enforcement? Not to get too in the moment, but I think it's a great example of the work your unit's doing.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I think the best way to think about what AMU did on this project is sort of quarterback a collaboration amongst a number of constituencies. So you know, that last paragraph of the press release on this one is particularly telling, in that it states that some of the investigations related to, you know, our RIAs came from compliance examinations. Thanks FINRA for assistance, and then the orders for the particular individual actions in this sweep are also, I think, illuminating, in that the orders for the settling RIAs note that, settling investment advisors, note that exams contacted the registrant twice before the registrant filed the Form CRS, and then the orders for the settling broker-dealers note that FINRA contacted the registrant before the firms complied with Reg BI. On the enforcement side, there are a lot of names. Not all of those names are in the unit, and so, you know, we really thank the staff from the core side who assisted with this sweep, and then the AMU staff are distributed across the country. And so I think one of the things that the unit really brought to this sweep is the ability to keep all of those trains moving, or everything moving in the same direction, and to bring in all of the referrals, or all of the, you know, everything that exam identified, everything that FINRA identified, and then coordinate those things so that we could put them in a package for sort of maximum market impact. And you know, I think that's one of the things that the unit I think is well positioned to do, because of the national presence, because of the relationship with the exams. And so, yeah, I think it's a really good example of something that we do well in the unit, with a lot of assistance from folks outside the unit on the core side, and with a lot of assistance from the folks in exam. As far as where, you know, Reg BI is heading, I'd say it's sort of where the facts are going to take us. But I do note that the Division of Examinations priorities has identified best Reg BI as a priority, and that the statement identified components of Reg BI that may be the subject of a focus in the next phase of examinations. You know, I think folks who've been around the SEC for a long time recognize that often enforcement actions follow from examination focuses, not always, but often. And two of the things that were identified were, you know, how firms have considered costs in making a recommendation, and the processes firm personnel have used to recommend complex products. I'm not saying that's where cases will be, but I could see those as areas that might be worthy of exploration.
Thanks for that. Leanne, I'm going to come back to you for a little bit of SEC inside baseball. Not to make a baseball pun here, but there's a whole process, as all of you are aware, but maybe many don't know, that of routing of tips, complaints, and referrals. So one of the changes that was put in place in January 2010 that we really haven't talked about is a whole new process for handling tips, complaints, and referrals. Does your unit get, if there's a tip or complaint about a muni issue or municipal securities issue, does that come to your unit? Is there any special review that's done of those tips to make sure they're going to certain units?
Yeah, so within the Office of Market Intelligence, which was part of the development of that new process that you're talking about, there are people who are assigned to review and triage, review and triage incoming tips, complaints, and referrals. And I think it's fair to say that to the extent any tip, complaint, or referral even remotely approaches a municipal bond or municipal security or public pension, they will refer those tips and referrals to us for further consideration. This, as I noted, this is a nuanced kind of unfamiliar territory, even for people who've been working in it for a while. And so, it makes all the sense in the world for those tips to come to our unit. And I think that the same is true with respect to other units, but particularly within the public finance abuse unit, where the subject matter is so unique. It's important that they come to us, and they typically do.
So, Joe, at one point that Rob Khuzami made when in January 2010, when the units were announced, was that specialization would help the enforcement division as a whole, and by building a level of expertise that could then be passed on to others. And I think that we've heard that from a number of the panelists today. Can you explain for a moment about how the market abuse unit's resources? You've talked about some of these data analytic techniques that have been developed by the unit. Do those get pushed out to the division enforcement staff as a whole, or are they just kept within the unit?
No, it's and thanks for the question. I think it is somewhat of kind of SEC inside baseball, but I think one of the things to remember about the market abuse, the other units at the time of their creation, is that there was, I think, considerable concern that the units would deplete the existing caseload, investigative caseload, or that they would take the other staff. And so, one of the things that we've sought to do from the beginning is to be a net generator of investigations and investigative leads. And over the years, as we develop these analytical techniques, we've done two things, or maybe three or four things, but a couple that I'll highlight is that it's often the case that when we find some suspicious trading, that we don't necessarily have the resources, the investigative resources to commit to that, and so we will try to find other homes for these investigative leads, and then also work with the staff who are investigating those cases to help further develop the leads and provide guidance along the way. In addition to lead generation, we're often consulted on referrals that the staff receives from FINRA concerning insider trading or manipulation or other market-related frauds. And I think often the value that we can add there is to help help the staff understand the scope of the scheme and the scope of what they're looking at by doing some of our own analysis to maybe build on the referral that the staff receives through the TCR system. We don't have anywhere near the resources to do every insider trading case that comes across our plates. So it really is important that we build these relationships and serve as a resource to the rest of the division.
And we certainly saw that in Philadelphia, Joe. I mean, I think that's certainly the case. So I'm going to move to the second speed round. If you could just in a moment tell us what the most rewarding part about being in the unit or being chief of the unit is. Can't use anything anybody's already said. No, I'm just kidding. So, but love to hear from you all on that. So, Adam, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and I think I'm going to circle back to sort of where Dabney started with the unit and with the people who had sat down in front of her and had lost everything. One of the things that has been most rewarding to me is working with the outstanding staff that we have in the unit, who consistently develop really creative and efficient ways to protect investors, including retail investors like the ones Dabney was taking testimony from. And over the last few years, our work has resulted in the return of about $500 million to harmed investors. And that's something that at the end of the day, I just feel really, really good about the efforts that we've made to protect retail investors. And one last point on it, a lot of our actions, I feel like, have also changed behavior going forward, so that not only are we returning money, but we're hopefully highlighting and improving practices so that future clients don't ever lose the money in the first place. And putting those things together, I found that incredibly rewarding in my time in the unit so far.
So, Joe, I'm going to turn to you. Most rewarding part about being a chief of the unit, other than being able to work with Dan Hawk and Rob Cohen?
Well, I mean, that's right up there, no doubt. But I mean, it's very similar, which it really is. And in particular, we've got staff in the market abuse unit who.
I'm sorry. I think we've lost Joe for a second. He's frozen.
Sorry. Am I?
You're coming in and out a bit, Joe. Yes.
I'm sorry. Why don't we move to Leanne? Unless you can hear me now.
We can hear you now.
Okay. So sorry for the technical difficulties. I was just saying, I think it really is the people. We have staff who've been at the SEC for many years, long before the units were created. The enthusiasm, the ingenuity that they bring to their cases every day is just inspiring. Really, a staff that is completely unwilling to leave good enough alone, and always trying to improve on our investigative work product and to find cases that just haven't been found before. So that's what keeps me going.
And Leanne, you're our anchorman here.
All right. At least I'm not the elder statesman. Thank you for that.
Only one elder statesman.
I think my response on this one is much the same. I mean, it's really about the idea that our expertise, our focus, our commitment has led the unit to be in a position to detect abuses and to protect some very vulnerable participants, particularly in the municipal bond market, including, for example, small, unsophisticated issuers like a library or something, and also retail investors who are by far the largest holders of municipal securities. And so, the idea that we have developed that kind of expertise, and to be able to protect those market participants is really probably the most rewarding part of this.
Well, that's a great way to end. And before I turn it back to Annette, thank you, all of you, all our panels, for participating today and for giving us your time. I know you're playing hooky on part of SEC Speaks, and we really appreciate you taking the time today and talking about the history of the units and some of the challenges and also some of the successes that you all have experienced. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Annette.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And that was a wonderful program. And thank you to all the panelists for such a thoughtful and insightful discussion. For anyone unable to listen in today, the Society will be adding this program to our permanent collection of virtual museum soon after today's broadcast. So there'll be other opportunities to view this. I also want to thank Morgan Lewis for its support of today's program and for its very generous support for the virtual museum for, frankly, the last 12 years. So it's very, very helpful. It's the financial support from organizations like Morgan Lewis and from our viewers that enables us to preserve the history of our securities markets with unique programming like you've seen today. So if you haven't had a chance to make a donation this year, we would greatly appreciate your support. Every dollar for our small organization goes a very long way. You can click on the Give Today button that's at the top of the homepage for a list of support options. So again, thank you so much to our panelists for their terrific insights and to our viewers today for joining us. And I hope you have a great evening.